I couldn't be more excited to be with you here today to talk about education philanthropy, one of the most popular causes, but also one of the most polarizing. As an institution, our public education system has been celebrated, maligned, studied, neglected, selectively resourced, and held to account. It's been lifted up by many as an indispensable lever for progress, equity, and social justice, and rejected as such by others. Philanthropy's relationship with our education system has been marked by an ambivalence that reflects these disparate views, with some philanthropists working to make change outside of it, while others work to bolster the system we have. This relationship has become even more complex as COVID, social unrest, and the deepening economic recession have magnified the inequalities already present in the education system and in society as a whole, as Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond referenced in her keynote. We're indeed fortunate that Dr. Darling-Hammond is joining us, along with our other incredible panelists who will share their visions of what impactful education philanthropy can look like. But first, I hope it's okay if I share a bit about my own journey as a philanthropist and why, in the realm of education, I've chosen to focus on early childhood education and care. Long before my husband, Mark, and I started our family foundation in 2007, I was a teacher. Although my master's in credentialing prepared me to be a high school English teacher, I ultimately decided I wanted to work with younger children and use my Spanish. And so my first real job was in a Spanish bilingual combination 5th, 6th grade classroom in Oakland, California in the 1980s. As I look back on that time, I still shake my head at the younger me who had the chutzpah to think she could jump into something like that. I was woefully unprepared for every facet of the work: classroom management, navigating 2 languages and 2 grades, connecting with the children's family, and the poverty I encountered. It was hard, sometimes daunting work, but I learned on the job and discovered a lot about myself, as well as all the things that I wasn't equipped to give these children that I knew they deserved. Fast forward to 2007, when we started the Heising Simons Foundation. My husband wanted to support work in climate and clean energy, and I in education. Even though I was no longer teaching, I had never stopped thinking about it and continued to be haunted by those things I hadn't been able to give my students. Things that I was starting to see were pieces of much larger systemic problems. There's so many directions we could have taken, but in the end, like many philanthropists, I was guided by my heart, as well as where I thought we could really make a difference. A combination of life circumstances and dawning knowledge brought me to the world of early childhood education philanthropy. I'd started to think about the importance of those early years in my last year of teaching when I taught 2nd grade. Some of my students had never attended kindergarten, and most hadn't gone to preschool. They were eager to learn and came to my classroom with impressive pools of knowledge, but also with significant gaps in their learning, gaps that I now know tend to widen over time, particularly in poorly financed schools where all too often children of color are relegated. Then when I had my own children, I was amazed at their natural curiosity about the world, how much they absorbed every moment of every day. And I saw firsthand that early childhood was an incredibly fertile time for learning, and those early years are really the foundation for all that comes next. Finally, it's clear, especially now that the pandemic has brought the early care and education system to the brink of collapse, that the state of our system is inextricably tied to women's empowerment. Because the care and education of young children falls disproportionately on women and they continue to earn less than men, women are the ones leaving their jobs when there are no affordable, quality places for their children to be nurtured and educated, thus perpetuating a cycle of dependence, flatter career trajectories, and poverty for women. In September, hundreds of thousands of women, nearly 8 times more women than men, dropped out of the US labor force, and for Black and Hispanic women, unemployment rates are now even higher. So I believe that investments in early childhood education and care are much bigger than the small children we think of as beneficiaries. These investments have the power to break vicious cycles and achieve greater equity in society. And I'm proud of our work, and I hope that the universe of early childhood philanthropy continues to grow. I should add that in addition to our foundation's work in education and climate and clean energy, we also now fund in fundamental science research and domestic human rights, by which we mean addressing mass incarceration and the criminalization of immigrants. My husband and I have signed the Giving Pledge, and a letter we wrote is on rotation as part of the Smithsonian's Philanthropy Initiative exhibit, Giving in America. I should mention that we're updating our letter in part to reflect our human rights work, which wasn't a major part of our giving when we first wrote it, but seems all the more salient today. So that's a bit about my journey. Now I'd like to return to our panelists and ask them about theirs. So I'm hoping each of you can take a moment to describe your own journey to this work. Who were some of the historic figures, the educators, the social reformers, family members, and philanthropists who inspired you? And what were some things that you learned about your journey, and what are some cautionary tales? So just talk about how you got here, and anybody can jump in.
Well, I'll jump in. I laughed when I first saw the question, because I'm not sure that anyone sets out to be in philanthropy, but so like many, I came to this work accidentally, but from a broader lens, for me, this work is just another way of doing my life's work, which is about making education more just and equitable from K-12 to higher ed. It's what I did as a faculty member and scholar of race and education. It's what I did as a vice chancellor of equity and inclusion, and it's what my core mission and focus is now at Spencer. I deeply believe education should be a means to the full development of the unique potential of each and every one of us, and that there's no greater or more sacred work to be doing than supporting human learning and thriving through education. And so I'm inspired by many, some folks on this call. I'm inspired by many of the historical figures in education, especially the Black women in history who were visionaries and warriors for justice and equity. Women like Anna Julia Cooper, Mary McLeod Bethune, who saw the deep connection between education, liberation, and civic engagement. I'm inspired by my grandmother, who got a master's degree in astronomy in the 1940s, long before women were encouraged in scientific pursuits. She went on to work at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and after her death and her things, we found this picture of her. So my grandmother, who was a tiny little woman in the shortest skirt you could imagine, surrounded by men in suits. She was the only woman in the department and still found a way to be fully kind of who she was. You know, this career path has been quite surprising. I never thought I would be leading the Spencer Foundation. Their funding was really important to me as a doctoral student and in my early years as a researcher. In fact, it was a program officer at Spencer when I was a dissertation fellow, Catherine Lacey, who made me feel like I could be a scholar. So I have deep roots at Spencer and a profound respect for the power of research to change careers, to make new kinds of scholarship possible, and really just an abiding commitment to the importance of education research in supporting education systems to move towards equity.
Well, I'll jump in second. Thanks, Naila. I similarly have a very personal relationship to the work I do every day. When I was a young boy growing up in rural Wisconsin, I was largely in a white environment. Ours was one of the few families that sponsored an ABC student, a young African-American man from Cleveland who had lived in 33 different foster homes and had gotten such a short end of the stick throughout his life. We continued to be part of his life briefly, but it struck me then, and it continues to strike me now, how unfair the system is that creates systemically those opportunities that deny kids who had every ability, every interest, every human right that I had, but would never see it manifest in the schools that he attended, either in Wisconsin or Cleveland or beyond. So for me, it became very personal. And it's also a little bit, you know, I was raised in a very Catholic family. So my parents were very much the Catholic workers movement, truth be told, and very committed to things like social justice at home. And you showed your faith by doing something about it. So from there, I went to college and then to law school. And during law school, started work with large institutions for the psychiatrically disabled. It was there, honestly, I just fell in love with dysfunctional public organizations. Mental health is an extraordinarily challenging area because it's about science and social science. And those intersections are places where you see both our strengths as a society and our weaknesses as a society. Our passion and racial prejudice gets played out in those arenas. And so from there, I ultimately got a Skadden Fellowship and worked at First Advocates for Children of New York. And then with the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, doing some of the work that Linda mentioned, thinking through school finance and school reform. In New York at the time, the system was having a disparate racial impact. So we were very concerned about Title VI and whether or not we could show that if you were African American or Latino living in New York City, you got substantially less, sometimes 3 times less than similarly situated students in the suburbs. And tragically, while we won that case after 10 years of litigation, we still have enormous challenges and we're back in court. And from there went to New Visions because I realized the law is part of the answer and we need policy frameworks and constructs that enable good people to do good work, but also you need to get closer to the ground and really kind of walk through classrooms and understand the challenges and strengths that students bring to school every day, the challenges and strengths that teachers bring every day, and some of the systematic ways we deny an equal education opportunity to young people. So at New Visions for Public Schools, I was CEO for 16 years, and we created 100 small schools, some charter, but most district. We created a teacher preparation program that was grounded in the clinical experience of teachers working with master teachers in challenging environments in schools. We built curriculum, we built data systems, we did a variety of things in close partnership with both the New York City Department of Education, but also with the communities we served. And frankly, when I was at New Visions, one of our key funders was the Gates Foundation. And lo and behold, when they were looking for a new executive or a new director of K-12, they knocked on my door with some trepidation. I left an organization I love then and now, but I really enjoyed being at the Gates Foundation. What I'm excited about the foundation is we've really made a commitment to a couple of things. One is really collaboration and working both in philanthropy and with community groups to better think through solutions. We no longer create solutions in Seattle. We work actively with educators and community members to think about context and the solutions that make most sense for them. We're committed to racial equity. Our goal is to improve the outcomes of Black and Latino students, as well as students experiencing poverty, to not only succeed in high school, but to succeed in some sort of post-secondary environment. And I think we span a gamut of the proven, the innovative, and then the deep infrastructure that needs to be built to enable all young people to learn. So we'll have a lot more to talk about, but I'm thrilled to be here and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. How about you, Linda?
Well, I'm not a philanthropist, but I will say a little about what brought me to this work. I learned when I went off to graduate school many years later that growing up, I was the beneficiary of a lot of federal programs that were part of the investments made in the 1960s. So I benefited from so much of what was going on at that time. And, engaged in my own way in marching for civil rights and against the Vietnam War and other things in the 60s. And I went off to become a teacher after college, went to Camden, New Jersey. And while I'd gotten a good public education, I think myself, I'd never seen the level of disparity that existed in New Jersey, where when I, went to the book room, there were no books, and where it was really about starving, the children who were there. And after a very short stint in teaching, I went off to graduate school to worry about policy, because I said, this is really, the inequalities are so striking. And it was because of philanthropy, because of the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, that I did my dissertation in school finance reform. They had a fellowship for minority and women scholars that funded people's dissertations, and that's how I got into that line of work. And later met Bob and worked on CFE and other things in that regard. But as I was going into that, I worked at the National Urban Coalition for a while. I realized that, as Bob did, that you can work to fund things more equitably, and that's critically important and still needed. But you also have to figure out how to get education to do what it should do. And so I got into, continued to do work in teaching, went ultimately into work in teacher education, did work on other areas of policy, in particular educator preparation policy, because you have to couple somehow the resources that are made available with the knowledge base that translates those resources into the right kind of practice that is itself also equitable and empowering for kids. And over the years, I did a lot of work in educator preparation at Columbia, at Stanford, on other issues of school reform and designing schools. Another thing that Bob and I share, Naila and I worked on learning policy together and learning theory. How do you get educators to understand what it is to support learning in ways that are culturally connected and empowering for the learners? And then the Learning Policy Institute was started in part with the encouragement of philanthropy, because Susan Sandler from the Sandler Foundation asked me to think about creating a way to carry evidence into the policy arena. We have a huge divide between what we know about how people learn, about how organizations function, about what good teaching and learning looks like, and what policies we make. And those had gotten to be a gaping chasm by the time we started Learning Policy Institute in 2015. And so what we do there is not only our own research on these issues, but assemble the research from others, brilliant scholars, like those that Naila funds through the Spencer Foundation and is herself, and try to really carry those directly into the conversations with governors, legislators, school board members, and help them, because they usually want to do the right thing, to figure out what it would mean to develop a policy grounded in the evidence we have and in what we know about how good policy functions. And so I've been the beneficiary of thoughtful philanthropy, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. I should mention that I'm a proud board member of LPI, and I'm struck by all the connections that this group has. So, and I should say that everything that you talked about in your answer to this question, I'm hoping I can return to in some subsequent questions. But for now, I'd like to ask Naila a particular question that came to me after I read a beautiful blog that she posted early on in the pandemic. And she began her blog with this sentence: "More drastic change to education systems has occurred in the last week than it has in arguably the last 50 years. What possibilities does this open up for the future of learning, for the reorganization of our institutions, for the centrality of families and family life?" And I'm hoping, Naila, that you could talk about some of these possibilities as you see them, and how philanthropy can leverage them. And maybe if you could talk a little more about what you mean in that quote, this reorganization of our institutions and the centrality of family life.
What a great question, Liz. Thank you. I think, as Linda pointed to in her keynote, this is a really interesting and important moment in education. And, you know, there are many reasons to be worried, as Linda pointed out, and there are many reasons to be hopeful. I see a few inklings of hope right now. One, education is in the public eye and in the public discourse like I've never seen in my lifetime. And so there's a spotlight and a recognition of how important education and schools are. I think as families are home with their students, monitoring Zoom and working on lessons, there's a new respect for teaching and teachers, both in terms of just how difficult teaching is and how important it is. I think districts are thinking more than ever about how important it is to close the digital divide, and there have been many kind of district-wide and statewide efforts to do that. There are new kinds of connections between home and families. It is completely clear we cannot do school without family engagement, involvement. And I think, you know, as I pointed to in the quote, we have proof that profound change is possible in a short amount of time if we have the will, or the absence of an alternative. A caution though, because I think while there are some bright spots of really interesting things happening nationally, in most places, we essentially took what we were doing in person with all of its flaws and inequities and moved it online wholesale. And I think that's a real missed opportunity. So I'll say a little more about what I see as the possibilities and how we might leverage them. One, deepening connections with families. This could be a moment where schools really come to see parents and families as true partners in their child's education, to see parents as the expert on their child and on their child's learning, to have substantive input into what their children are, the content and the learning that their children are engaging in. It can also be a time as families are spending this sustained time together to learn more about the valuable socio-emotional support young people are experiencing while at home, and thinking about how that might translate into what we could do differently in classrooms. Be open to a shift in the nature of the kinds of learning that schools organize for, right? My teenage son has developed several independent projects where he's just taking time to learn things he cares about. And I think that time and space for students to explore topics of their interest, to increase the own learning, to more deeply connect the content of teaching and learning to community experiences, to family experiences, to the many important events that are happening in the community and the world. And we're also seeing the profound effects of inequality and how differentials in resources meant that when schools went online, some students got laptops to take home, teachers who were trained at the technology systems that could pivot to support their learning, while others just didn't have the resources to make that transition successfully. Some districts could provide the PPE, create the conditions to serve students in person with social distancing, while other districts struggled to do so. And so it's a real-time illustration of one of the things Linda pointed out in the talk. Resources matter to support students' learning. And I think it's a call to create a better resourced and more robust system.
So over the past few years, education philanthropy has come under increasing scrutiny and critique. Some philanthropists have argued that we actually are doing too much education philanthropy, which, as I said, is a very popular topic in philanthropy, and that maybe we ought to be focusing more directly on addressing inequality, addressing some of these core issues like institutional racism, poverty, the digital divide, rather than focusing on education. This is a bit of a devil's advocate question because I think you're going to have a great answer for this, but I'm curious, and I'm hoping I can hear from Linda, but all of you, if you want to jump in, how would you answer that point? How would you respond when people say, you know, we really need to be moving away from education philanthropy? And I do have one related question from our audience, and this speaks to the other issue in education philanthropy, which is we have a lot of disparate opinions on how we should go about it. And this question comes from, not surprisingly, from Washington, DC. The topic of this symposium, the questioner says, is inextricably linked to contentious political debates. How do we move forward on evidence-based practices? And is there any hope for getting these through divided chambers in state houses? So,
that's a lot.
I know. And you can answer that question any way you want. You can either look to, should we be focusing on this problem now in light of everything that's happening? And how do we address the disparate
voices? A little beach and then bump into Bob and Naila.
Yeah.
I do think that there are, we all have to, Benjamin Mays was a great educator in Atlanta. He was the first African-American member of the school board and desegregated the Atlanta schools. And he used to talk about how every person was born to do a certain thing. And if you don't do that thing, it won't get done. You have to put your bucket down where you are meant to put your bucket down. So, are there other areas of philanthropy? Yes, there are. Should we be tackling childhood poverty? We should. And I think a lot of this has to do with leveraging the evidence and the policies so that people understand what the problems are and know something about what the solutions can be that are critically important. Should we be dealing with all of these other areas of housing policy that, intersects with segregation? Yes, we should. So I think each person has to figure out where they're going to put their bucket down. But for many people, that will be education. And then the question is, what kind of education philanthropy can be most productive? And you said earlier on, Liz, that, of course, philanthropy derives in part from one's own personal experience and one's own passions. And that's quite legitimate. I think it's important for philanthropists to think about within the framework that they're operating, what are the ways that I can do this work that are going to be sustained and potentially accessible and scalable so that many people get the benefit and that the benefits enhance equity, right? Rather than some little thing that just, happens and then goes away. And there are big areas where there's less contention. I mean, certainly anything can be contentious, and education is inherently political. We wouldn't have had all this inequality for all these years if it wasn't political, right? Who gets educated? How much do they get educated? What are they allowed to do with their education and so on? But if we jump forward to, presumption that people are now ready to think about every human being as worthy, then the kind of philanthropy that can build on what we do know and what is going to be sustainable can be in those areas that I described earlier in part. How do we get to the settings in which kids can flourish and be well taken care of, the kinds of school designs, the resources that are essential to support those school designs, and the capacity of educators to do the right thing, for each and every child. And the on-ramps, the early childhood elements, and the off-ramps, the transitions to college and career, that will enable, us to close opportunity gaps and get kids on a pathway to life. There are a lot of things that philanthropy may do that don't get at those fundamentals, kind of miss the mark of what would actually make a real difference, and often get into very, very political waters. And there may be good arguments for some of that, but I think the big task is so enormous and obvious that we ought to be able to encourage a kind of education philanthropy that is really clearly pointed at moving us towards both an equitable system and a high quality system.
If I can just jump in, one of the things that has always struck me, particularly now in COVID, is the criticality of philanthropy to be risk or venture capital. By that, I mean, there are lots of things that government just can't do, particularly in times of polarization, that philanthropy has a little bit of freedom to do. If we do our jobs well, we move towards equity, we move towards what's right, as you rightly mentioned from Dr. King. And we can do that in ways that sometimes politicians and legislatures, even school boards, may be hamstrung to do. And so making those investments, particularly now, where we're starting to see through COVID the enormous innovative role teachers can play in thinking about their roles with young people. As Naila mentioned, the role of parents and community members coming in and sharing some of the burden of addressing the entire need of every child and building on that child's assets, because every child has extraordinary assets. The roles of technology that don't replace human connection, but can enhance human connection, making what seems to be hard work simple, the basic efficacy of running a school, and enabling teachers and adults and others to think hard about, well, how do I really help Bob learn to read, given that he's 3 years behind and that's going to be a struggle. Only humans can really figure that out. The shifts in pathways that exist between high schools and colleges now, technology gives us an opportunity to provide college courses in ways we never could before to young people in Title I schools. How do we do that? How do we connect young people to their futures in ways that are visual and real, and they can experience them in real time? All of these things are possible. And so for philanthropy, I think one thing we should be doing is piloting different new innovations and taking risks that government or other stakeholders can't take against what we believe is right. But secondly, look for real opportunities once we've piloted to scale with government, scale with other stakeholders, and ultimately stop if the idea turned out not to work. Too many people stick with ideas that don't work. Be transparent, own that the idea doesn't work, invest in the evaluation, and then be brave enough to kill it and take some of the political risk that actors in the broader sphere can't take. If philanthropy does that and lives into its convictions, I think we can really move forward in ways that are really exciting and catalytic to the broader dollars that are spent on an annual basis by states, the federal government, and localities.
I agree that it's really important to lean into the convictions, and those convictions on the part of philanthropy need to be deeply informed by the research base, by what we know works and what matters, by taking up the most important and most critical issues. And those convictions need to be informed by what communities and families want for their young people. So I think it's sometimes that top-down nature of philanthropy that can be problematic, but philanthropy needs to be deeply attuned to the right thing in relation to what we know.
Naila, I agree. And I just want to add one thing, which is it also needs to be tempered by patience. Change takes time, and you shouldn't kind of look at early signs and symbols and think that your investment isn't going anywhere. Maybe it's my Catholic background, but I think a lot about those first people who put the stones in for cathedrals weren't quite sure whether they would see the top of the cathedral when they were done. But choose your stones wisely so that you can build on them and others can build on them. And that's why collaboration and philanthropy is so crucial.
Well, I think we're getting great answers. Should we actually do this for real?
Well, you guys are answering my question before I asked it, because I was literally going to ask about how do we do what you're talking about? What are some strategies that philanthropists can employ to make sure that they're really capturing that constituent voice, that they're really speaking with the families, with the communities, and not, doing philanthropy over them? You can talk about some of the strategies that would be really helpful.
Sure. One thing I'm excited about is for the first time, we're going to be making grants directly to students to engage in continuous improvement and examine the problems that they are confronting in their schools. I think one of the lessons we've learned over the course of the summer and with so much student-led demonstration is young people have real convictions, they have real ability and capacity, and we need to tap that capacity if we're going to ultimately change the educational experience in schools. They are extraordinarily accurate when they judge the effectiveness of their teachers. They're extraordinarily thoughtful in thinking about the systems that affect them every day. I think they have the real capacity to make a difference as we go forward.
Anything more on that from either of you, Linda or Naila?
We'll leave that good answer.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I would just add that I think there's also the issue of how we make decisions about grantees and who we're funding. I know at Spencer we rely on peers to make decisions about what good research is and the research that we should be funding. And I know for other foundations that fund community-based organizations, to have other community-based organizations, to have community members in on the decision-making process can be critically important.
One thing I'd just add to that is that because I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how are we going to get policies over the finish line that will change the system, is that we often need to have collaborations between and among researchers, community-based organizations, civil rights organizations, educator organizations, and legislators and governors and others, so that we're bringing all of those voices together and sort of arming, each other to create both the will, the knowledge base, and the strategies to get things done. So I think it's really important that we come out of our silos and that philanthropists help us get out of our silos in these relationships that allow us to get more accomplished.
It's beautiful. As a philanthropist and someone who's constantly thinking about how to do better philanthropy to accomplish these goals of really funding in a systemic way, I want to return to something you said, Linda, in your keynote. You talked about 3 pillars. You talked about setting up, or I guess you talked about thinking about the unthinkable, having high aspirations, building institutions, and leveraging equitable policy. And I'm hoping that you and others here today can talk about what does that really look like in philanthropy. And I know in the past you've also talked about litigation. What are some ways that philanthropy can really dig in to these important ideas and ways of accomplishing change?
Yeah. Well, every one of the advances that I talked about, was supported by philanthropy. So whether it's changing the way states fund schools, the litigation aspect of it, but also the research about what will work and the research about the strategies and what is working so that you maintain the political will. For example, the New Jersey case that I talked about had a lot of philanthropy to bring the litigation over 30 years with 9 decisions. That's talking about sticking with something. But also, when they, created the preschool programs, they had a lot of philanthropy, both around the evidence base to do it, and then funding some of the model programs to get the things going, funding the educator development, supporting the research to document what was working and why it should be continued. Those kinds of things are all things that build a system, but that philanthropy can really, contribute to. We've talked about the fact that right now, the need for educator development is very substantial. And we've got a lot of philanthropy right now investing in models of teacher preparation, like teacher residency programs that are solving multiple problems at once, and that states and federal government can pick up in policy and actually become the norm rather than the exception. For those things to work, you always have to be thinking about what might be the strategy. How can we get it going? How do we study it to document what's working? And then how do we work with people who can think about how to scale it up? So I think there are lots of pathways in. It's thinking about how to do that work in a way that can make a difference ultimately in the way we do business for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's really important. This point about the collective and philanthropy's kind of unique power to convene, to bring people together around a shared mission, to help determine like who's in what lane towards that shared activity. I think there's something else too, which I've been pondering quite a bit, which is the power of philanthropy to set a frame and invite people into it. So I think as we think about these issues of inequality, I think quite a bit about how a lot of our work to document or disrupt inequality is still rooted in frames that see kids and families as the problem, that see kids and families as something to be fixed. And so at another level, philanthropy can invite in frames that actually see families and communities as a key part of the solution, and that don't start from a place of deficit, that don't start from a place of what's lacking, start from a place of what's possible and what exists and what strengths are that can be built upon. I think that framing piece is really important as shared activity as well.
Yeah, and if I could, I would just add, the other thing that I think is important, we frequently at the Gates Foundation refer to ourselves as impatient optimists, but I think we have a better, more important skill set, which is humble learners. The people may disagree with me. I think really listening, being empathetic, learning and adapting from people you're working with, and being bold simultaneously is a real skill set. And so trying to kind of balance all those things is crucial. And then just building a little bit, Naila, on something that I think is implicit in what you're saying. As you set the frame, remember the distorting power that you have as a philanthropist and figure out how to compensate for that power. It's really crucial that we include new voices in understanding problems, framing the capacity that we need to solve them, and ultimately working collaboratively over extended periods of time to make that happen. If we don't do that, we'll just replicate some of the mistakes we've made in the past. There's very little that's tabula rasa in education reform, but there are a lot of lessons we can learn from people who have come before us. And by learning those lessons, I think we can be much more effective going forward.
That's such a good point, because there is such a amnesia about what has come before, and sort of grounding ourselves in the discipline of looking back in history and what was done, how did it turn out, what can we learn from it, how do we carry it forward, is rare but really important.
I'd like to pick up that idea of learning from history, and also think about one of the reasons that our public schools started in the first place, which was to teach us about what it meant to be American. And also picking up on this idea of engaging youth and families. I wanted to ask a question, maybe end with this question, especially considering that we just had an election on civics education. And I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts on this. How should we be teaching civics and history For example, the 1619 project, which I believe is part of the Smithsonian, focused on the history of slavery in the United States and its lingering effects, and was recently criticized by President Trump. Do you believe that education philanthropy should support programs and curricula despite the prospect of ideological differences? And are there concerning implications in doing so or not doing so?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be really careful about distinguishing between ideological differences and the historical amnesia that we have in this country to not deal in historical fact. So those things are really, really different. And it's important to recognize that we don't teach full, accurate historical fact when it comes to the roots of inequality in this country. And so we have to start there. And then I think the other pieces around, you know, like Sam Weinberg's work at Stanford, thinking about how are young people making sense of the information they're finding online? What do they know about what it means to engage as voters, as informed citizens? Like all of those pieces are really important. And to some degree, what we've seen recently in this country is a willingness to distort and not remain deeply committed to the full democratic nature of our society. And so I think it's evident now more than ever that attending to civic education is really important. And I think just, you know, starting from historical fact is really important.
I'll just add on certainly agree +1 on what Naila has said. And you mentioned, Liz, that of course, civic education was the reason for a public education system in large part, was to be sure that there was a way for us to, engage people in being part of a democracy. One of my hats is president of the California State Board of Education. We just enacted a state seal of civic engagement, which students can earn and which we hope districts will engage in. They can get it on their diploma. Ultimately, it can be part of the accountability system, along with our seal of biliteracy. And what we're wanting to accomplish with this is having students be understanding, obviously, the way in which governments and communities operate, but also being actively engaged in contributing to the well-being of the community, whether it's the classroom, whether it's the school, whether it's the local community, understanding the ways in which we have to learn to live together and be interdependent, and then how do we take that up in ways that both understand individual freedom and understand the common good, and create pathways to that in each of our own lives, which will take different forms, but which is part of being an educated person, right? It's part of being a member of society. So seeing that as something that schools ought to be engaging in, and that philanthropy ought to be contributing to for the well-being of the society, I think is very fundamental. I think it was Jefferson who said, society that would be ignorant and free wants what never was and never will be. And this is a key part of literacy for a democratic society and action to be a member of that society.
Yeah, I would just add, if you're really about equity, you have to be about equity, and you have to look at the data and the system's performance clear-eyed and understand where we are and where we need to go. I mean, one thing that I've always remembered is back in the 90s and early aughts, many people talked about the fact that we were 16th or 17th in the world on OECD tests, but we hadn't disaggregated that data by race. And when you did by race, you saw that white students were in the top 3 or 4 countries of the world, and Black and brown students were in the bottom 3 or 4 countries in the world in both math and literacy. So if we want to be about equity, it's great to kind of send out the fantastic email when there's tumult in the streets, but then you have to really look at the practices, the systems, the policies, the resources, and really make a commitment to drive forward on that, even though it will be difficult. It's absolutely essential that we realize the American dream for every student.
I want to thank you all for everything that we talked about, for contributing such everything that you know about the work that you've been doing for so long. It's really been an honor to be with you today, and I look forward to what comes next in this moment. There's so many places philanthropy can go. I'm really excited to dig in and continue this work. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.